Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over everything you'll need to know about Gems of War Guild War Defends. Many people have been requesting that I do a updated video going over that, and it is exactly what we're going to be doing right now. We're going to be splitting this video into 4 parts, all 4 of which are going to be time-stamped in the description below. We're going to be going over basically the strategy, why you should be setting good defend teams, and just some of the methods to do so. Then we will be going into the particular teams that I personally use at this current moment in time as each one of my color day defends. Then I'll be going into ridiculously cheap ones that only use ultra rare and below that pretty much everyone has, as well as the free kingdom epics that can be obtained from any kingdom within about 30 minutes. And then I'll be showing some mid-range ones that will be able to be used kind of if you don't have any mythics yet, but you still have quite a few legends and stuff, and just kind of teams that more towards around like the level 500-ish range once you've kind of gotten a good amount of troops, but you still don't really have everything yet. But anyways, let's get right into that by going over the basic strategy. So right under Guild, into Guild Wars, we will be brought to all of the Guild War related screen. Guild Wars occurs once every 3 weeks within Gems of War. You have to fight 6 different guilds, each having 5 individual battles that increase in difficulty. The way that they increase in difficulty is off of this stat system. As you can see, as you go higher to the higher ratings within the guild, they end up getting more and more stats, and you'll basically get a specific bonus based on how well you did within the previous Guild War week, and the better you did, the more bonus you'll essentially have. And you can buy additional ones as well through various resources, mainly gems, but some of them cost a little bit of gold, glory, and so forth in order to have just a little bit of extra stats. Reason you may want to do this is there are various rewards. Simply just participating in Guild Wars even just gives you a little bit, but as you can see, if you're in higher brackets, you can get even more substantial rewards that can way overpay for the amount of expense towards actually upgrading your troops, which is something worth considering. As far as the actual strategy for setting up your defend teams, you will have 6 different color days. Each one of these is focused on a specific point system. These go and increase your amount of points whenever a person uses this within the Guild Wars. So let's say we were go and attack someone right here. We'd want to go, and since this is a blue day right now, we are going to personally ourselves want to use a team that is completely blue. So all 4 of our troops, or 3 of them with 1 other mana generator or something very similar to that. We basically want to use as many blues as possible whenever we face up against this particular team. So knowing this, we can set our defense accordingly. One really big misconception with defense in Gems of War, particularly within the Guild Wars, is thinking that you need to set each one of the defense as well to a pure color, but this is not the case. You can set each one of these defense to absolutely anything you want. The only slight limitation that you have, which you can kind of see being talked about on the little chat thing that's going on the bottom here, is you want to make sure that all 24 of these troops across all 6 teams are completely unique. Not a single one of them should repeat. The reason for this is you get 500 points per each one of these that are unique, for a total of 2,000 per day, for a total of 12,000 throughout the entire week. And this makes up a pretty substantial amount of your score. Anywhere from about 1/3 to about 1/4 of your score or so is how many points that actually makes up. So a really hefty chunk. So you definitely want to make sure that all 24 of them are completely unique, and aside from that, you can set each one of them to whatever you want. There are 2 basic strategies that you can use for setting defense. The most common one is just to have a specific color team designated for every single day, and then simply every single week just coordinate the name of your team with whatever it is. As you can see, I named mine defend blue, defend brown, so on and so forth, so that every single week I could just set it to that. One other strategy that you can do is set up 3 very strong defend teams that you make as strong as possible with the best things that you have, and then 3 kind of weaker ones that you kind of just shove in there just to have unique stuff. And basically what you do with this is you check on the rankings of your guild. You'll be able to see people around your guild, and let's say that you're somewhere around here and you're wanting to get up in brackets. So you're going to want to set your strongest 3 defend teams to the ones that are the highest. So right now we can see if that was the case, we'd want to set our strongest 3 to the Black Hand, Titania, and Na, however you say that. And you would want to set your teams to that. But let's say you were like all the way down here and you were the 17th right now, and you don't want to go down in brackets, and your guild's kind of just mid-range within the guild, then you'd want to set your 3 strongest teams to whatever the 3 weakest guilds are in your bracket in order to make sure that you can stay within the bracket. So that's the other strategy you could do. I personally don't use this, but it is a strategy that you could consider. The 3 strong teams with 3 weak teams instead of just making 6 designated color teams. So, with that being said, let's go over the personal defend teams that I actually use. Keep in mind, as far as actual defend rate on most of these teams, if you're getting anything above 25% win rate, you are doing pretty good with your defend. It is, particularly this late in the game, I don't know exactly what it might be in other brackets, but it is, most people who are actually playing within Guild Wars have upwards of a 90% win rate. So if you're even getting like 10%, 20%, 25%, your defend team's doing at least decent. But as you can see here, for Blue Day, I currently use Glaceon, Captain Skullbeard, Amnesia, and the King Bloodhammer. King Bloodhammer is particularly good on this day as it does remove all blues and then converts them over into Doom Skulls. This is good any given day where you can deny out the color of the day, and in this case we can deny out the blue in order to create Doom Skulls out of them. As far as the rest of the team, it's basically set up completely around skull spamming. We have the Doomstorm once we get a kill with our King Bloodhammer. We have Glaceon creating even more Doom Skulls. Unfortunately, it does create blue as well, but more often than not, that doesn't really get in the way too much. It also has a freeze, though this isn't too particularly useful on a Blue Day, as Blue Day does have a lot of freeze options. Though the more reasonable aspect of this that makes it nice is two things. One, it has immune to freeze. Again, even though blues have a lot of immune to freezes, they also have a lot of freezes themselves. So having our first slot in a skull spam team that is immune to frozen will help us not to be able to lose our turn, and it has 65% reduction, which synergizes with the fact that the rest of this team is skull spam related. We have a Captain Skullbeard here, which is basically just for additional mana generation. Also creates a little bit of skulls, which will ideally cascade into other stuff, particularly if there is a Doomstorm active at the moment in time. And Amnesia, you can replace with a cheaper option. She is a mythic. You can replace her basically with any yellow troop, but for the main purpose that I'm actually using her in the context of this team is the fact that she gives 1 attack and 1 life to all daemons per turn. And while this isn't really that much, this is a daemon, the Glaceon, so we are going to be gaining slightly more stats on it to make sure that it doesn't die out. Of course, this combined with its 65% reduction will ideally be enough to make sure that it doesn't go down on a Blue Day. As far as for Brown Day, I'm actually using the new Ubistet. You can't use double Ubistet. Double Ubistet's actually amazing defense teams. For one, I don't have it, and most people probably don't. But for another thing is, of course, you can't repeat. So you can't actually double up on any troops, even though there are several teams that may do that. For example, an all-goblin team will sometimes double up on Fizzbang. You can't actually do that within Guild Wars because it's just going to penalize you points, and there's really no point. So as far as this, it's a pretty standard Divine team. You probably see me using it a lot. It's a Mercy. The whole point of Mercy is, well, a lot of things. It heals your weakest so they don't die. It gives you a cleanse to all allies, which is amazing. And of course, the main thing is it's empowered, so it gets to do that from the very first turn, and it's just insane for yellow mana generation as well as its side effects. This will feed right into Infernus. Infernus is arguably the best mythic and one of the best troops in the entire game right now. Has insanely high damage off its ability, has decent mana generation off its ability, has board clear off its ability, has a Firestorm if it gets a kill, and on top of that, it has the best burn, which is basically just 3 damage to the entire enemy team per turn, assuming they don't have immune to burns. And on a Brown Day, the only thing that most people will be using that has immune to burn are a Gorgolfa. It is also good to consider whenever you're building these teams, if you are deviating from anything that I am doing, to consider what people might actually be using on the given day. So on a Brown Day, of course, most common things are going to be used are things like Gorgolfa and Corvash, so you do want to be mindful of these kind of things when you are building your teams. As far as the next one, we have Ubistet. Of course, the main reason for this is to get a double kill. Pretty potent. If it kills 1, it kills 2, so that can basically secure you to win if he ends up getting that off. And he can get that mana pretty quickly because he is divine. Everything on this team is divine, so not only are we getting even more stats, but we will also be able to do a half mana start by using a divine Ishbala. Of course, that gives all divines capability of starting with half mana, and we also have a green to yellow convert, which if we needed could also give us a bunch of mana. As far as the yellow day, pretty much every single time I do this, either for yellow or Brown Day, these days I've just been doing it for yellow, I've been liking to go the Scion. Scion is an insanely good counter against Gorgolfa, and as I mentioned, yellow and Brown days, both very common days for Gorgolfa to be used. One thing that makes it particularly good against it is the fact that whenever it does skull damage, it will steal all of its mana. So since Gorgolfa and most of these teams are a pretty major mana generator for the team, you'll just be able to basically deny that out, while also being able to do additional drain to them. Other than that, Spirit Fox, basically regardless of what point you are within the game, should essentially always be used on a given yellow day. It's just insanely good with an empowered into a automatic remove all yellow. It can also be used within some kind of true damage team if you really wanted to, in order to get that you to actually utilize its damage. More often than not, you're not really utilizing it for its damage though. You're mainly utilizing it for the 7 mana drain that it has, as well as the removal of all yellow. One other thing that's particularly useful about a Spirit Fox is similar to us using all Divine team here. We'd likely use an all Divine team as well if we were to go and do a yellow day, if we weren't going to go down a Gorgulfa route. And with that being said, we would probably be using Divine Ishbala, meaning we start with half manas. And Spirit Fox is pretty good against that since it can drain 7 mana, which when a troop gains half mana, that's pretty much all of the mana that's going to be draining from it. So very, very useful. Should have basically every single yellow day just completely build around Spirit Fox and work from there. Very rarely would you not bother using that on yellow day. So if you don't have that fully traded, really good idea to go and do so. It's only an ultra rare. Next up, a pretty basic staple of any defend team that you should ever be doing within Guild Wars, or even for PvP if you really want to. The very annoying triple goblin combo of Nobbin Brothers, Princess Fizzbang, and the Queen Grapple Pot. I particularly use this on Purple Day. The main reason for this is if you use a Siren with it, which is a pretty popular thing to synergize with it. We can't use a second Fizzbang because it will penalize us. But if we use a Siren with it, we will go and basically it has Empowered. Anything with Empowered, you can kind of tell by now with almost all of these having Empowered on it, are pretty potent. Because you get such a heavy start on it, and it makes the AI work a little bit better, and makes it do less errors, essentially. But basically, we start with Empowered. It will create 9 of a troop's mana, so it'll take a random one out of whatever it uses. So let's say it is a brown-purple. It'll have a 50% chance it will either do brown, or 50% chance it will do purple. On a Purple Day, obviously, you would have the highest chance of being able to spawn purple, since everything on your opposing team will be indeed using the color of purple. With that being said, you will then be able to likely get your mana generation into Fizzbang, and this is really important because out of everything on this team, this is the most important one to get its mana up first, and this will basically make it and force the AI to have to go and get Princess Fizzbang's mana up to full. That's another thing to really keep into consideration when actually picking your teams and stuff, is always consider what the AI will do. Never just set a team that you know is good for a player, but you have to consider how the AI might actually use it, maybe even test around and stuff like that, because the way that the AI functions is way, way different, obviously, than how a person will function. So you basically have to force the AI into doing the correct move, and basically by using this on a Purple Day, we will get this to spawn a bunch of purples for our Fizzbang. Our Fizzbang will cast, ideally it'll explode, and if it explodes, we pretty much just auto-win the battle, and it will go from there. As far as what really makes this team work is we have a 1 in 3 chance of exploding on this, as well as 1 in 3 for AoE damage, and a 1 in 3 for just attack reduction to make sure they can't really hit with skulls. We have Princess Fizzbang, which will ideally the 50% chance to explode all greens, very potent, and automatic extra turn with that, which is just insane. Queen Grapple Pot for automatic full AoE to go be able to hit all the enemies. It also gives 5 HP to all allies, well, specifically all goblins, but since almost our entire team other than Siren is goblins, it's essentially our entire team. It's 15 life every single extra turn it gets, specifically off the board, of course, not actual casting, but still, that is very, very potent, and Siren will pretty much be able to give this to you immediately, assuming that more often than not, she will be hitting it for an extra turn every single time she casts. Next up, Green Day. Green Day can be a little bit of a mix. As far as how I would normally go about it is definitely use a freeze option. Early on in the game, you'd likely want to go with a Ice Goblin, that new ultra rare that came into the game several weeks ago. Or later in the game, you're generally going to want to go with a fully traded Queen Mab. My personal team for this is the very cliche Forest Troll Nyx, but still insanely good. Forest Troll, it doubles all the greens on the board. One other thing that's pretty noteworthy about this is green does have a lot of entangles, and as immune to entangle, it also has 33% scroll reduction, and this combined with the fact that it does have that entangle into the green spam can be pretty good against actual greens. As far as the Nyx, this is going to be used to counter out anything that's going to be getting high mana, drains 12 of its mana or up to 12, and then create a bunch of blues, which you'll be using to basically get the whole loop going. You just create blues in the Forest Troll, green back into Nyx, so on and so forth, until you basically drain out the entire enemy team. You use Dawnbringer. If you don't have Dawnbringer, you can use a Kraken here instead, but ideally Dawnbringer using Titan hero class. This is currently not Titan. I just change it on the day of normally if I'm going to be bothering to use this team, that I'll just replace it with a Kraken. But Dawnbringer, of course, the only mythic weapon currently within the game, gives all other allies barrier, which is really potent, really high damage to all enemies, and it even gains a little bit of extra magic if there's 13 or more reds, though in this context, it's that part of it. It's pretty irrelevant. You're mainly using it for the fact that you're getting half mana star off the Titan hero class, as well as the damage and barriers. What's relevant about Titan hero class, and specifically, there's two things. One is your hero weapon will get 5 additional damage because it's a red related, I mean a blue related weapon. for the hero class. Not only that, but you'll also be able to go and get half mana starts on the Forest Troll because it is a giant. So the AI will basically be able to one turn in most instances your Forest Troll, which is very helpful. And of course, as I mentioned, the main purpose for Queen Mab isn't really even much of her ability so much as the actual freeze that she has. Though her ability can be potent, given that you're creating blues off the Nyx, which if she has 13 or more blues on the board will allow her to automatically extra turn off of the mana burn. And pretty commonly on red day, 4 times dwarves. Pretty much always going to be running at 3 times, 4 times dwarf on a red day. Main reason for this is it doesn't really conflict with any other team, and one of the best red counters in the entire game is indeed Lord Ironbeard. So to be able to synergize him into a team, he's generally just used with a bunch of dwarves. One other thing that can be used for red day, though I don't personally use it at this current moment in time, is building a Queen Titania team. Queen Titania is your next best bet if you're not going a 3 times, 4 times dwarf team. But as far as Lord Ironbeard, he deals a high amount of damage and deals triple if they are red. And obviously on a red day, pretty much your entire enemy team that you're going to be up against is going to be using the color of red. So being able to hit those very high numbers, very nice. If they happen to be using a monster, even more of a counter. And he has 50% skull reduction to be able to just take out their damage some, just so they don't hit as hard. Reds do have very high skull damage, they have a tendency to, as well as pretty high cast damage, so this will at least mitigate some of their actual damage. Also, since we're using dwarves, we are getting a little bit of bonus from having unique dwarves and unique Kazale, and this is giving us slightly more HP and armor to help us survive the high damage impact that red troops tend to have. It's another reason why dwarves tend to be pretty popular on this day. Other than that, we also get triple damage if this thing has a higher armor than the enemy that it hits, and on the top fact that we're getting more off our penguin, as well as the fact from our bonus, makes it pretty easy for us to actually have a higher amount of armor value, not to mention she already has a pretty decent armor value to begin with. Also, all dwarves have a bunch of immunities, the most noteworthy of which are immune to Deathmark as well as immune to Devour, which can be pretty handy to make sure that you don't instantly die with them. The penguin here, a little bit of an odd one, but it gives +5 stats to all blue troops. Basically, the reason that this is used is to make sure that these troops don't die, as well as to increase their amount of damage that they do. This will bring this up to 47, and triple of that will bring it up to 141, somewhere around there, about 141 damage, and in most situations that will be enough to one-shot. If I'm not mistaken, that is actually exactly enough to one-shot this, even though it has pretty decent durability. So you can see that hits some very, very high numbers, and if you think that you have the stats compared to everyone else in your bracket to be able to one-shot with this team, it's basically the most potent thing you can possibly ever really do for a Red Guild War day. And other than that, the main thing that puts it all together is the King Highforge. He has a 50% mana start on all dwarves, and since this is a dwarf, and you'll easily be getting half mana on both of them. Obviously, the penguin won't be, but he also has a capability of summoning dwarves, so worst comes to worst, this team could even just win off of simply summoning more dwarves. Not only that, but he has a boost ratio on his damage based on how many dwarves are on the team. That works for himself, so even if you only have 3 dwarves, that's 18 additional damage for 36 total, since it hits 2 different troops with his capability. It also has some stun, so that's stun part's not really that relevant though. But that is all 6 of them, and what I personally run for each one of these days if I was to run a specific coloration one. So that's that. Let's go now into the earlier game teams. Before I do, gotta take that nice tribute for 12 tribute. So let's go head over now to the weaker teams. These are all teams that only use Ultra Rare and below, as well as Kingdom Epics. When I refer to Kingdom Epics, what I am referring to is if you go under any kingdom and you click Questline, there's a quest line here that you can go and complete out. And at the end of this quest line, you'll guarantee get 1 epic troop. And what I mean by free Kingdom Epics is each one of these can, as soon as you finish out that quest line, you'll end up obtaining that card for free as a copy from completing that quest line. So whenever I'm referring to an epic in one of these teams, they are all obtainable from doing one of these quest lines. And most quest lines only going to take you about 30 minutes. Even at the most, it's only going to take you about an hour, even if you're running with very slow early game teams. So really easy to obtain all of them. And ultra rare and below are generally stuff that you'd have within the first month, or even quicker than that, maybe even in your first week of playing the game, or first few weeks of playing the game. So we'll start all the way down with purple right here. We're going with Night Coronet, Lava Elemental, Snowy Owl, Baba Yaga with a brown yellow. This is mainly just to make sure that our Lava Elemental as well as our Night Coronet gets up a little bit quicker. As far as the Night Coronet, it's an ultra rare. What makes it pretty good is, well, everything. It's actually one of the most well-rounded, decent troops in early game. Definitely highly advised. Even in PvP, you would probably end up using this troop earlier on in the game. Also, one other thing to keep in mind real quick that I didn't mention, most of these low-level teams are geared towards level 200 and below, approximately that range, so do keep that in mind. This is by no means something you should be doing later in the game. None of these teams will work later in the game if you're in the higher brackets, so do keep that in mind. Anyways, this thing deals damage to the first and last enemy and removes all of the purples. And it gets a little bit of extra damage for this, and it's just really, really efficient damage. On top of this, if you can get it fully traded, it's fine if it's not, but it gets 3 to all stats, which makes it even tankier, plus more damage. Gains even more damage for every blue on the team. This particular team doesn't really utilize that much since he's the only blue, but still, 1 extra damage still helps. That's 2 total extra damage. And he has stone skin, which is the main relevant thing about him, and this makes it so you can tank out skulls very nicely. Next up, we pretty much have just a lava elemental. This is just for basically tanking capability. You have this just for the nice little explosion that the AI will do, and it will end up doing just a little bit of damage to their first slot, plus burn them. Burn, of course, really effective earlier on in the game. 3 damage per turn can definitely start to stack out quite a bit. For when the Night Coronet dies, this thing has a removal of purple, specifically destroy, so you actually get to accumulate the mana. Unlike the Night Coronet that removes it, this one destroys it, so you'll be able to get that right into your Baba Yaga. Not only that, but if you happen to have it fully traded, it does have the magic link, which you'll be able to put into your Baba Yaga in order to get its mana up higher. Baba Yaga is an epic that you can get from completing out the Yorskaya questline. You don't need any traits on it. Out of everything on this team, it's the only one that doesn't need to be traded. Of course, it's helpful if it is, but it's too expensive generally earlier on to bother trading compared to other options. But she deals damage to the last 2 enemies, which synergizes with the fact that Night Coronet also hits the last enemy. Basically, you can see we're synergizing everything with that. We have this guy that hits first combined with this guy that hits first, and we have this guy that hits last combined with Baba Yaga that hits last. So essentially, we're focusing all of our damage on the first and last slots, or at least forcing the AI to basically have to target these two. If, for example, if we were to only have all single targets on this team, and we weren't running with something like these, which are specifically targeting out things, the AI will just like randomly target everything, and it won't really focus anything. But since we're focusing it with these two to go hit the first 2 slots, and we're focusing with the first and last in order for it to hit the last slot, we're basically forcing the AI to do the right move, essentially. But on top of this, it also has a double silence. Troops can't accumulate mana while they are silenced. They also can't cast their ability while they're silenced, and it's just a really nice disable, since most people earlier on in the game either don't have the trait for immune to silence, and just teams in general don't really build into immune to silence. So very, very nice, and it functions even once the Night Coronet goes down. Next up, for the low ones, we have ourselves a low yellow. Do keep in mind, I have built all of these teams to be able to go and be completely unique, so you could literally just copy all 6 of these if you really wanted to. So, for the low-level yellow, we have a Drake Rider here. This converts all yellow into red, so that will get rid of the yellow so we don't have to deal with it. This will also end up feeding our Miststalker, and the rest of this team below, the Drake Rider is basically a true damage team for when he dies. One really nice thing about a Drake Rider, which makes him pretty tanky, is the fact that he has a 100% chance to summon a Drake when he dies, and most people aren't going to bother stunning this. Particularly on something like a yellow day, there aren't too many yellow stun options. There are a few of them, though most of them are pretty clunky and not really worth using, so they probably aren't really going to bother using a stun of sorts to do up against this. So you'll easily be able to get that 100% summon, assuming you have it fully traded, which will be really nice, and that will end up giving you a Drake there that will tank even more once you get it. On top of that, we have Astral Spirit. This has an empowered into true damage. This is mainly to hit the first slot on the opposing team. We then have a Miststalker. This is another one of those instances where we're basically forcing the AI to do the right thing. Since we have true damage off of empowered Astral Spirit, and we have true damage off the empowered Spirit Fox, what we're essentially doing here is using another true damage, which will automatically hit the weakest enemy. Weakest enemy, whichever one has the lowest armor and HP value. But essentially, the reason for why we're using this is, aside from the true damage, it's going to be hitting whichever one is the weakest one, and ideally this will be the one that we hit with one of our other true damages, and it will basically make the Miststalker automatically kill whatever the weakest one is on the opposing team. Even if it doesn't, it will poison them, which is really effective earlier on in the game, and if it does, it gains 3 additional magic, making it even easier for it to kill on the next one. It also gains a little bit of extra damage for every red on the team, though again, in this case, we're not really utilizing that, but what we are utilizing is the +1 purple. This combined with the +2 purple on our banners, actually giving us a +3 total purple, which with our 3 purple troops will help them get up quite easily. And on top of that, as I mentioned earlier in the Better Teams video that we use for ourselves, it is always good, regardless of if you're early game, mid game, late game, to pretty much always incorporate in some way, shape, or form a Spirit Fox into your yellow Guild War. It's just insanely powerful, empowered into a 7 mana drain. It's true damage, plus it removes all yellow, which of course on a yellow Guild War day is pretty important to do. And of course we set it to the -1 yellow banner as far as our banner, because, well, we don't really need yellow since we're trying to counter out the yellow specifically. So it's basically just a true damage spam team. Next one, onto the brown. Brown Day is actually really interesting, I do have to say. Out of all of them, I have to say this is probably my personal favorite, even though it's not particularly strong later in the game. Just how thematically this works, I really wish there was more teams that were capable like this. Troops that normally, like, I would never almost use a single one of these troops ever, but in the context of early game, these have some really interesting functionality. So we have a +2 red, +1 yellow banner here. This is mainly to rush up our Knoll and our Sliff in particular. As far as the Trent here, we're going to be using this to remove all brown. Again, always really good to remove or destroy or get rid of in any way, shape, or form, whatever the color of the day is. And since it is brown, we're trying to get rid of brown. He has a 50% reduction on skulls. This is always good. Anything that has 50% reduction, really good to consider using it and trading it earlier on in the game. Really good for just countering out skulls. Gains a bunch of attack and armor. This will help make sure he tanks, as well as gets better value off of skulls. It will make it so the enemy won't really be able to bait out the AI to take skulls, since his skull value will be so high. Next up, we have Sliff, which also does something based on brown. For every single brown on the opposing team, it gets 10 whole additional damage. It also deals damage based on its attack, though the main portion of its attack, particularly earlier on in the game, is going to be based on how many browns it has. So let's assume the enemy did go and use 4 browns. We'd be getting 40 additional split damage on it, which earlier on in the game is actually a pretty substantially high number to be getting there. So that's a really, really nice troop. On top of that, if you actually had the traits to be able to fully trade it, it does start with half mana too, which would get it to 5, meaning if you surged, it's yellow. You'd be able to one-turn this thing to full mana, which is insanely good. And even if you didn't, you'd still be able to get it up pretty quick based on the yellow on your banner. Not only that, but we're also getting a +1 yellow off our Dust Devil, assuming we haven't traded that far. Really nice. We're mainly just doing this to get the Sliff up. We also have an Empowered into this ability. Many people, particularly earlier on in the game, might not try to counter out a Dust Devil. The easiest way to counter out a Dust Devil, if you haven't already been doing it, if you see it on the enemy team, is to shift every single thing on your team by 1, so that when a Dust Devil casts, it basically just puts your team back into the correct order that you were going to just normally use anyways, and you pretty much just do it that way. But many people earlier on in the game, as well as into mid-game, may not actually really notice it or realize it or bother changing their team for it, and you could reorganize their team to make it really clunky and not really work properly, and that's essentially the whole purpose of what a Dust Devil is going to be doing for you. You don't really see me using it much, but that's mainly because its damage is so ridiculously low. But earlier on in the game, 5 damage to everything isn't necessarily horrible, and for the amount of value that you'll get from its second trait, as well as the fact that you will be able to go and just disorient their team, is pretty nice. Not to mention, even if they do that one thing where they offset all their stuff by 1, if you happen to get multiple casts off this, you could eventually get it to the point where it does disorient their team. And on top of all of that, we have the Knoll here, and the main reason for this is it does triple damage to brown troops. It will either hit the first or the last enemy. This will synergize again with the whole fact that we're trying to target things out. Ideally, this will end up hitting the first enemy when it does its ability, because this will synergize with the fact that our Trent has very high skull damage, which will be able to clean up whatever it hits. Though earlier on in the game, you'd probably be able to one-shot everything with this. Later in the game, it does take 2 shots to be able to actually get any kill with this. But depending on how high your magic is relative to the enemy's total durability, you may be able to actually secure 1 shots with it. And even if you weren't, him hitting 1 would probably get cleaned up with a Sliff afterwards due to its split damage. So either way, you're pretty much going to be able to get and clean up the kill, or at least the AI will be able to do so. So next up, for the green defense, we have a Leshy here. Leshy is for the purpose of countering out all of the greens on the board. It will destroy all of them so that the AI, or the enemy, I mean, will not be able to go and specifically use them. It'll also go and entangle everything. This aspect of it isn't really too relevant, as greens do have a lot of immune to entangles, but the main thing that this is kind of useful for is just to destroy itself. On top of that, it has immune to entangle, so it won't get entangled itself, so you still get to retain all your skull value while the enemy may not. And it also has a nature link, so you will be able to get a little bit more green into your green-related troop, which is really good since it does end up hitting extra damage. This is basically just like that other troop I was just mentioning. It's either the first or the last enemy ends up hitting triple damage. This time, instead of it being based on brown, it's based on them being green. And it also places a Hunter's Mark, and if it ends up doing it to the first enemy instead of the last, this will be particularly useful since you will be able to go use your unentangled Leshy to be able to go hit it with a skull and be able to do twice as much damage with it being Hunter's Mark, as that is the aspect of what Hunter's Mark does. On top of that, if it does get Hunter's Mark, Skulls that are exploded via explosions do still give you the value. So let's say you go and explode 1 Doom Skull and 1 Standard Skull. That is 6 damage total. If they are Hunter's Mark off of this ability, off the Hunter's Mark thing that he places, this will do 12 damage instead of the intended 6. So it even boosts up your Ice Goblin's capability of being able to do damage. Other than that, as I mentioned on the previous team as well, on green days it is really good to run a freeze. Greens are very popular for running just green spam. If I'm not mistaken, green has the most amount of troops of any color that actually creates its own color. So generally you do want to have a freeze for this day, and Ice Goblin is the cheapest possible freeze they can get. It is a ultra rare, it explodes 2 random gems, freeze a random enemy, automatic extra turn, very nice. Also, if this thing happens to not be entangled anymore and your Leshy happens to die out, it does do 2 times damage to the frozen ones as well. And other than that, since we already have so many disables, we have the entangle, we now are going to be also throwing the silence at them. If a troop is both entangled and in silence, it essentially can't do anything for its duration. Entangle makes it so it's unable to do any skull damage, and silence prevents it from accumulating mana as well as being able to cast. So you're basically making the troop useless other than their traits. So very good disable. In some instances, a parrot can actually be better than a silent one, which is basically the late game version of parrot. But no, it's just overall really insane. It can get triple silences, which is super great value for only 12 mana cost. Of course, it's a 50% chance that it would actually be able to hit on the adjacents, but even regardless, even its base value of just doing some damage into a silence can be useful. And the AI does tend to focus more on the troops that have higher mana accumulation. So let's say something on the enemy team has 15 mana and something else only has 7. The AI does tend to try to prioritize the higher mana costs when focusing silence. Not always, but more often than not, it will go for that. So overall, would end up working out decently. Next up, for the low-level blues, we're basically running the entire team around the Mammoth Amera combo. This I used a very little bit when it first came out, and it's actually a really insanely good early game combo. The Mammoth is only a common, so pretty much anyone can go get that off of some gold keys. What it does is it deals damage to an enemy's life and armor. The particular interesting part about this is life, basically meaning that is true damage right there. All of the damage that it does. It also ends up removing all of the blues and getting a boost ratio off that. This is really relevant since it is a blue day that we're using this for, so we'll be able to go and deny out all of the enemy's blues, as well as getting a boost ratio that will allow us to do even more true damage. What makes this insanely good is if you go and complete out the Kingdom of Leonis Empire, you will get the free epic of Amira, and Amira ends up doing 2 times damage to blue troops, and it's pure true damage, so you can synergize this true damage with this other true damage and just kill out every single troop. The only bad side to this is the AI will probably not target them correctly, but you can't really help that. It's just such a really good combo, and you just kind of have to hope that the AI will end up using them properly. And if you the AI does hit the Mammoth into an Amira, that's pretty much enough damage to kill absolutely everything in the game earlier on in the game. So very, very potent combo. On top of that, we have Herdmaster. Main reason for this is just to accumulate a lot of mana so that we can keep getting that combo up. We have a Lamprey here, which will also be helping us a decent amount. It has a 30% chance to devour them, or to devour a troop if it is blue, and since this is a blue day, the enemy team is mostly going to be consisting of blue troops, so ideally we'd be able to get a devour or two, or the AI would be able to, with this troop, and then you just destroy it simply off of this troop alone, even if your other combo doesn't end up working out for you. So overall, pretty nice. Also, Herdmaster does have Cleanse. It is pretty common that people might be running Freeze on a blue day, so you have one thing that has immune to Freeze. Always good to at least have one on a blue day. Not really mandatory. It's particularly useful if it's actually first slot as well that is immune, though it's better just to have the Mammoth down there. But Herdmaster does have a Cleanse on everything, so if you happen to be getting frozen here and there, or your AI team, it will be able to get that off. So next up, for the red defend, we have a Cockatrice, Stone Giant, Sister Shadows, and Rock Spirit. This one's a little bit of an odder one just because it doesn't counter it out as much, but it does have the Cockatrice Rock Spirit combo, which overall in early game is pretty strong. Cockatrice has an Entangle and a Mana Drain. One thing that's pretty nice about this is this does tend to prioritize mostly based on whichever one has the higher mana cost, but since the highest mana cost troop normally on the enemy team is the first troop on the enemy team, this will mean more often than not is going to go Entangle and Mana Drain the first troop on the opposing team, creates a bunch of brown for you. This brown goes into your Cockatrice and then into the Rock Spirit, and then you pretty much just, or the AI team will pretty much just keep winning off of that. It also does extra damage if they are entangled, which you could do off its own ability, so you'd be getting higher skull damage there. And as the yellow, it needs to be able to get its mana. Stone Giant here is for the Stone Skin mainly, as I mentioned earlier. Most things with Stone Skin, pretty nice. There aren't really too many things that are capable of really doing anything to red, but Stone Giant is one of them, and you can go and remove out all of the reds in order to go get a nice little hit onto a random enemy. This isn't really going to be too applicable, but everything else is meant for cleaning up. So Sister of Shadows here will automatically hit the 2 weakest, which is whichever 2 have the lowest durability on the opposing team, and this is basically to tell the AI to actually hit the correct option. What's also nice about this is it automatically gains an extra turn every single time it does get the kill, which will allow you to just go back right into everything else when your AI team does that. And you also end up getting the Rock Spirit. The AI tends to use this a little bit more correctly. It will sometimes go and try hitting skulls, but generally it will hit quite a bit of browns. With the Cockatrice on our team, this will be creating a bunch of browns, which will allow our Rock Spirit to do a lot more damage. You can try using the Rock Spirit a little bit higher up into your team if you want to get in and fully trade it, but if you use it more towards the end of your team, you actually don't even need to bother fully trading it, though you might already have it fully traded if you're running something like a double Rock Spirit, Deep Boar, Ranger in early game for your normal PvP team, so you might already have the traits already into this thing. But of course, do keep in mind this is Guild Wars, or Guild War Defense specifically, so you're not able to repeat troops, so we are unable to actually go and use a double up Rock Spirit, or else we will be penalized point-wise if we were to go and do that. But anyways, that is all of the low-level team, and if you still have any questions about them, do feel free to leave any. But if you go use all 6 of those, that will at least be something that you might have laying around if you are a newer player. But let's get now into the mid-range ones. Things to mention about the mid-range ones. Again, these are all teams that use 0 mythics. I tried to make them slightly unique compared to my other ones. As far as all of these, some of them are a little bit weaker than others. I do admit some of them are pretty kind of average. As far as mid-range, it's a little bit hard because normally with mid-range, I kind of always feel the need to put like 1 mythic into it. But with each one of these, we are going to be using absolutely 0 mythics whatsoever, just legends and below. So unlike the other one, this will now allow us to use non-kingdom epics, as well as every legend within the game for each one of these. And all 6 of these will be unique in that all 24 of these troops are completely different, so you could literally just copy all 24 of these if you really wanted to. Though do keep in mind, with many of these, unlike the low level ones, you probably are going to be missing key troops from this, so do keep in mind that if you're missing a few troops from a specific team, you may have to use completely different teams for these. These are mainly just to give you some general ideas with everything else that we've already mentioned, more so than to actually tell you to use these 6, because it's mainly just for helping you to give just simple things that you might be able to use. So first off, we're using a Divine Ishbala Forest Guardian combo. This does use 3 legends and the Epic of Mercy. Definitely want to get yourself an Epic of Mercy fully traded. The trait stone is actually available this particular week if you're watching this right now or anytime this week. You can get all the infinite green blues you really want off the current glory reward thing. So definitely a great time to go get a Mercy fully traded. It's used in pretty much every mid to late game team just because of how popular Divines are these days, and this team is no different. Basically with this, we go right into an Empowered into the Yellow Convert. It has a nice cleanse, has a nice life heal, automatically on the weakest, helps to prioritize keep things alive. Again, always good to make the AI force it into doing the correct option. And one nice thing about the Mercy is it will automatically do the life gain on whatever the weakest troop is, so you're basically forcing the AI to always heal the correct option, which makes Mercy the only healer, if I'm not mistaken, in the entire game that the AI cannot mess up because it automatically hits whatever the weakest is. Other than that, we have Divine Ishbala, basically the divine that makes all other divines insanely good because it gives all divines half mana start. Also has a really decent convert, which will basically, with his entire team, is all based on just skull spam into skull spam into skull spam. We get the double convert there. We have a double convert off the Forest Guardian on slightly different colors. And on top of that, we also get the King Bloodhammer. And the whole reason we're using this is for his Doomstorm. And with this Doomstorm, we'll be able to go and get even more skulls to come onto the board, particularly the ones that explode and do 5 more damage. On top of this, we also can convert all blues into Doom Skulls. And with all this combined, we'll be able to go and just do such a substantial amount of damage against everything. And also, since this is a purple day, we do have 2 ways to specifically deny out purple. We not only have Mercy, which is converting all of the purples into yellow immediately, but we also have Forest Guardian converting all purples into skulls. So we're denying them in 2 different ways with this team, and basically perpetually denying them with a Divine Ishbala into Forest Guardian loop. So pretty much everything with it will be helping the AI to be able to automatically deny out the enemy's purples and hopefully their entire team with skull spam. Next up, yellow. Basically just a standard 4x dragon. Nothing really too off here, just, well, just very standard 4x dragons. You could, of course, try replacing this with even stronger dragons if you have it like World Breaker and stuff, or even throw an Element Grim, or even just go Element Grim Loop if you really wanted to. But of course, with no mythics, this is just a pretty standard Christine X Dragon Soul combo thrown in with a few other ones that don't conflict really with any other team, just to make sure that we can just go and kind of have this as one of our offset ones. Sometimes when you're trying to build teams for specific colors, you will have some teams that will suffer due to having less options, and this is kind of one of those instances. 4x Dragons is still decent, though compared to like several months ago, it's definitely not as good as it used to be, that is for sure, but it is still substantial enough if in a mid-range, level range, where you can use this for PvP, you can use it for your defend team, and it's core troops that you're likely already using and stuff, particularly Christine X and Dragon Soul in particular, you're likely already using in many of your other teams already, so you're not really going too far out of your way for it. But basically, this does a lot of damage to all enemies. Basically, this entire team, almost everything on it hits the entire opposing team. This can be pretty hard countered by a Submerge, but Yellow, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't have a single Submerge. I think it's like one or two, actually. Actually, it does have a couple options, but most of them wouldn't really be used specifically in the context of a Yellow day, so you don't really generally have to deal with Submerge. Really, the only day you'd really have to deal with Submerge is Blue Day in particular, and this is not Blue Day, so we don't need to deal with that. We have Stone Skin here. If we take a Purple, which we're kind of somewhat forcing the AI to by having our banner slightly set to it, we will be able to go and get this thing crystallized, getting it enchanted, and gaining mana per turn so that it can keep casting. You can also offset this if you really want to use it for its summon, though generally the AI is just going to keep blocking itself with it, and it's not really worth it. Dragon Soul here is the core mana component that we're really going to be using. It gets a lot of explosions, a lot of damage to all enemies, and also souls, though that's completely irrelevant when used on defend. The main thing that's relevant about it in the context of a Guild War defense is the fact that it gains a lot of life, helps your dragons gain even more life, and the 50% chance to revive. On something like a Yellow Day, as I mentioned in the previous one, on the low level range, most people are not really going to bother using stun, and particularly towards the mid game and late game range, there aren't really too many good yellow stunners out there, so no one's really going to be going out of their way just to stun this thing, and you're likely going to get a baby dragon, and then that baby dragon will hopefully transform into something good, like another Dragon Soul, which then transforms into another Dragon Soul. But no, it can transform into any dragon in the game, and since you're already using a full dragon team, it will likely fit within its context. As far as Shadow Dragon, what's helping us here is the +1 purple, so we actually have a +2 total purple, which will help us to turn our Dragon Soul if it surges, or 3 turns if it only surges on one of them. But basically, we will be able to go and convert out all of the yellow on the board, get them all converted into purple. Since it is a Yellow Day, that will help us some to deny it, and it will basically just feed right into our Dragon Soul. Other than that, we have Sylvanie More. This is basically just to make sure that they do less damage, has that entangle whenever you do the extra turn. Between Shadow Dragon, Christine X, and Dragon Soul, you're probably going to be hitting quite a few extra turns in there when your AI takes stuff, so that will be helping just to make sure that the enemy has absolutely no skull value whatsoever, and even if they do get some skull value, you have the 50% reduction. This thing also has immune to entangle, which won't really come into handy too often, but it does allow you to basically keep pressuring with skulls while the enemy might not be able to keep pressuring you with skulls due to the reduction and the entangle. And yeah, that's pretty much a team. Pretty mid-range, but that's what it's for. So let's go into the next one. This one is actually surprisingly funny. It's really good, actually. King Mikhail did get buffed this most recent patch. While I don't really mention that too much and don't really use him much, he does have one particularly good purpose, and that is actually surprisingly to kill a Gorgolfa. He is a brown yellow that can counter out that other brown yellow, and again, on brown day, Gorgolfa tends to be pretty popular, and even if people aren't using Gorgolfa, there's a lot of things with skull reduction that tends to be used that have traits that reduce down the amount of damage that you specifically end up doing. So King Mikhail will be pretty useful since it enrages itself every single time it takes brown. While you will be able to get the brown off the board, if the AI does happen to get one, this will now give it Enrage. Enrage makes a troop do 1.5 times more attack damage when it does it, and it also makes it so it ignores all traits. So if there's a Gorgolfa there with 75% reduction, you just get to completely ignore it while also doing slightly more damage to it. So basically just a slight way to kind of get around the whole Gorgolfa thing, which is pretty commonly used on this day. Other than that, we're basically just running red spam for the rest of the team. We have Taipan here, which is going to convert out all brown into red. This is very, very useful. It's basically the new version of Mercy that just came out this week, actually. And it has this empowered here, converts it immediately, all the brown away into red, which will then go right into your Yagüe Queen Titania combo. And with our +2 red banner, Artist will just go and get all the mana generation we really need to just get going. And then Yagway just gets up, it hits the first 2 enemies very hard, and gets a little bit of boost based on his life as well, and gets a little bit of their magic. So basically every single time he casts, he keeps getting stronger and stronger, assuming he's not taking HP damage. And he also gets to transform all purple to red, which will then get even more mana accumulation. More often than not, he can even get a double cast, and every double cast he does will essentially just auto-kill the first 2 on the opposing enemy team. So very, very potent, kind of like that new mythic, except it's a little bit luck based on if it actually gets a double kill or not. On top of all that, it also has immune to mana drain. While this isn't as useful on a brown day, one thing that could possibly be used is Corvash. So if they were running, let's say, Gorgulfa Corvash of some kind, this would have immune to mana drain, at least for its first hit, assuming it didn't already get you stunned. There's currently no troops that have immune to stun and immune to mana drain, so ideally it would not get you stunned beforehand, but you'd have immune to mana drain if it was running something like that, and on top of that you get to steal a bunch of life based on their red. Other than that, we also have a Queen Titania here. This is based on all of the reds that we have. Basically, if there's 13 more reds on the board, she gets to hit everything very hard for an automatic extra turn, so very nice there. This also works good as a red day counter, though I personally like using it on other days other than red, in this case, brown day. On top of that, it also has Fairy Fire. Again, Gorgulfa, while it is immune with the Fireproof, there are several troops that generally would be able to get hit on a brown day. A good majority of them would be able to get hit by the Fairy Fire, and this basically makes it so your spell damage is 50% more specifically against them, which will allow your casts, like Yagway, to be able to do more damage. It would also make it so if King Mikhail decides to go do his AoE thing on a natural cast, that it would also do more damage, though he's mainly just here for his trait and to fill the last little gaps in our color, and just to kind of intimidate with skulls. Brown and Yellow Day are particularly important to intimidate with skulls, simply because, or what I mean by that is, you want to make sure whatever you're using is like something like a Scion or something with Enrage or something basically that counters Gorgulfa is the bottom line. Because if you don't, most players will just keep baiting out the AI into taking really dumb moves, like just taking skulls that do almost nothing, and it will just keep hitting Gorgulfa for 75% reduction, and they're just going to tear you apart. So having things like Yagway that automatically helps to try to get rid of Gorgulfa quickly off the first lot and stuff like that is generally what you want to do. You want to kill out Gorgulfa basically as quickly as possible every brown and yellow day. That tends to be the biggest threat every single time, and giving your AI something that deliberately tells it to do so helps it out a lot. So something to consider. So on to the next one now, mid-range green. This one can be built a couple different ways. Of course, you could still go down the route that we did earlier with the Farce Troll Nyx Kraken kind of combo with Queen Mab, though I figured I switch it up just a little bit, just to kind of make it a little bit more unique, though you could of course just go with the standard team. But here we're going to be going with a Carnex. Carnex, one thing that's pretty nice about this, Green Day, 2 things that tends to get ran on Green Day, Poison and Entangle. This thing is immune to both of them, so if they're running a Web Spinner, they will not be able to get 3 times skull damage, and if they're running Entangle, they will not be able to get Entangle. Not only that, if they're actually expecting that, you also get higher damage on your skulls. Most green teams do already assume that you're going to be Entangled, so the fact that you'll have immune to it while also being able to do more skull damage will be very helpful. Not only that, but you'll also be able to go and explode a bunch of skulls, which will get them off the board quite consistently. We have a Kraken here, not too many greens. We'll really have immune to Devour. There are several of them, but not too many of them would actually run it all the way in last slot. There are a few, but most green teams get a little bit clunkier. Most green teams are assuming that they're going to be infinitely looping in a way. So not only do you use the Queen Mab for that, but also you use the Kraken for that, because if they are going infinitely loop and they're expecting your Kraken not to go off, you might be able to surprise them with a random Devour out of nowheres, which ends up working out quite nicely, and that's pretty much the whole purpose of why we're using this. We also get some blues, which will synergize into our Queen Mab in order to possibly extra turn offer, though that's not really the main component of why we're using this. The Arenas here, since we're using so many other purples on our team, we'll be able to go and convert out a color into purple. The AI, admittedly, is pretty bad with this, so the results may vary. The one thing that is pretty nice about this, which the AI cannot mess up, is it automatically gets a not a perpetual purple storm, but it gets a purple storm whenever a enemy ends up dying. So if your AI team can actually secure a kill, it's pretty much going to be pretty smooth from there, because once it gets the purple storm, your Arenas isn't really going to miss under AI control, or at least it's going to reduce its chance of missing by a pretty high margin. Of course, under player control, you're never going to miss with an Arenas or something similar to this, but getting the storm when under AI control is pretty huge, because that will start to allow it to actually secure it. And you have two different ways to kind of go and try getting a quick kill with this team. Or the AI does. It's either going to try getting a bunch of skulls off a car next, which will intimidate the enemy and eventually kill out their first slot, which will then get you the Purple Storm, or you're just going to randomly pull out a 35% chance to devour, which will instantly get you the kill and get you the Purple Storm you need. And then on top of that, of course, pretty standard for most green days, run freeze. Really important to run freeze. And in this case, we're going to be going simply with a Queen Mab, fully traded, automatically gets freeze every extra turn, and with Arenas converting to purple, ideally she'd be the option that would do it, or your Karnax will get it off of Explosion, or your Kraken will get it off the blues. Many different options that it could particularly occur on. So as far as the blue defense, we're running a cheaper version, basically, of what a Scion Ragnagord Famine team looks like. This is basically what it looks like when you don't have that. So we're running Scion in first slot. This acts as a really, really good way to end up draining out the opposing team. We have a drain on our first slot here, which whenever it takes a skull will end up draining out the first enemy. We also have 7 true damage to all enemies, which will also, again, be able to drain them out. We also have +1 purple, which will be able to get its ability up even quicker. On top of that, we have Ragnagord. We set our banner to brown-red, so it gets its mana pretty much immediately. This will allow it to mana generate into everything, off the fact that it has explosions, and even at lower magic values, this will still, even in the mid-range, if you only had like 10, 12, that's still pretty much enough to explode every single thing that's going to be hitting, because it explodes all of a chosen color. Can't really force the AI to do that correctly, but hopefully it would, and you would get a nice amount of explosions on one of the higher colors. It does tend to try to at least focus more often than not the color that is more common. So if there's like 20 of one, because I believe it just like randomly picks a single color on the board. So let's say there was like 20 greens and only 5 blues. The chance would be way, way, way higher that it would click a green than a blue or something like that. But yeah, I believe it's a 1 in 64 chance that it would just click every individual one. So whatever one is more populated tends to be the one that it particularly goes for. On top of that, we have a green, or we have a grapple pot here. A grapple pot can be used out of the context of a goblin team if you aren't expecting yourself to use a 4x goblin team. And if you are, Ragnagord tends to be one of the better options to do it with. Main reason for this is since it has an automatic extra turn into its full AoE damage that hits all the enemies, you'll be able to go and keep spamming out the basically Ragnagord, and then eventually getting back into the Queen grapple pot, getting that automatically, get your Ragnagord mana back up, and it'll just keep going back and forth. And AI is not always the greatest about actually using your grapple pot every single time, but ideally it would go and do that. On top of that, we have Glitter Claw. Main reason for this is Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire will be able to go and do 50% additional damage to all of our cast value. The main thing that this is relevant for is specifically our grapple pot damage that it has. Essentially, this entire team is built around specifically grapple pot, which seems a little bit odd, but it does work if you're not using specifically a 4x goblin for a different day. Queen grapple pot's actually a really, really decent alternative to things that hit all enemies if you don't really have anything else around on a specific day to be able to do that. Though do keep in mind, if you are using this, you would not be able to use a 4x goblin team on a different day unless you were using a weaker version of it, in which case you should just be using the stronger version of it with the grapple pot. But anyways, the other reason why we have this, other than that, is you may notice that all of its mana is actually being blocked, since all the first 3 actually cover everything. But what's nice about this is if you have it fully traded, it gets enchanted whenever you take a red, and since the AI is going to be focusing on brown and red, it's going to take a red pretty early, which will allow you to automatically get a Glitter Claw. Even if it's being blocked by everything else, it would eventually go and get it by force, which is basically, again, forcing the AI to get something that you want it to do. And for the last one, couldn't really think of anything to this, to be honest. So again, just with the dwarves. Of course, standard dwarves, pretty much every red day. There's 2 things you're running for red day if you're mid to late game. You're either running all dwarves, mostly dwarves, or you're running Queen Titania. That's basically the only options for red day. And of course, that's what I ended up going for here. This is particularly the cheaper version of it though, without the fully traded penguin. This is just with a Dwarven Gate. So very easy, of course, with the common here, the Dwarven Gate. You basically go have the stone skin here. This gets even more durability, gives all other allies 5 mana, which is really good for only 10 mana. Not only that, but it gives them all barriers so that they don't die. This is very helpful on red day because, as I mentioned earlier, red day tends to have one of the highest damage outputs of any day. Not only do they have very high skull damage, which we have 50% reduction into 50% reduction, but they also have very high cast damage. And for that, we have barrier basically to help keep us alive through that. So that's essentially what we're using that for. Also, by using 4 dwarves and 4 from this kingdom, we're gaining ourselves a lot of extra durability. We're gaining ourselves, we don't even have a pet for either of these because neither of them exists at this current moment in time, But even with 0 pets, we're gaining 14 HP and 4 additional armor, which is a pretty substantial amount of stats. And of course, if pets came into the game, this is going to be even stronger. So this could actually be better than the penguin version, possibly, once the pet comes in for both of these. Could be ages, though, because they're only adding 1 per month for whatever reason. But anyways, that's for a different time. As far as the rest of this team, we kind of already went over it earlier, but of course, one of the reasons why 4 times Dwarf or similar teams is so popular for Red Day is simply because Lord Ironbeard is one of the best counters on a Red Day. He deals triple damage to any red on the opposing team, and this is just a lot of damage. More often than not, it's even enough to one-shot, and you could use a penguin like we were using earlier in order to get it into one-shot, or you could just hope that you have enough higher stats. If you're a guild that's kind of more mid-range, which is, well, mid-range right here, if you happen to have higher magic than the opposing enemy compared to their durability, more often than not, Lord Ironbeard, even without a penguin, will be able to get one shot, so you will be able to secure that, especially if you are actually buying magic through gems, through the actual little stat thing within the guild. But really good at getting those one-shots, really good against monsters as well, though not really that big on Red Day. I don't think red monster teams are really used. But again, Lady Ironbeard, again with the triple damage, pretty decent, synergized with the other one, and you're gaining a lot of extra armor and just stats in general, and ideally you'll have the higher armor than the enemy, just with your overall durability, and if you do, you'll get the triple damage, and she even has some skull reduction if worse came to worse. And on top of that, given that you're using a full dwarf team, his amount of extra damage is insanely high. You end up doing 24 additional damage to 2 different enemies for a total of 48 damage. This in mid-range is particularly potent, since, well, that's a very big number, 48 total damage essentially you're going to be doing due to all the dwarves on your team, so very high there. You keep getting the dwarf summons, and of course the main thing that puts it together is the fact that it actually gives all dwarves half mana start, so you'll be able to go and get everything started just a little bit quicker. But anyways, guys, that is everything that I wanted to go over with the guild and Guild War Defends. We will go and do basically the same thing again, probably for next Guild Wars, with specifically going over invade teams. Of course, this was mainly going over Defends, so if you still have any specific questions about Defends, do feel free to let me know. If you have any, this is the video to do it on. We did this to just go and update it, so I probably won't be updating it for a while. So again, with that being said, feel free to leave as many questions as you have about specific Defend teams, what you should set, even just simply asking what you should use for a certain day if you don't know or don't have an idea yet. But or if you're wondering about a new troop that came in or anything like that, just leave them here and I'll go and answer all of them. And as you can see, this one team that I mentioned here, you can see it now has 1 win, 2 losses. Pretty good rate. That's 33% win rate right there. Of course, like I mentioned, as long as you're getting like 25% or higher win rate, you're doing insanely good on these. Even if you're only getting 10%, I would actually still be happy with that because it's late in the game. The win rate tends to be very, very low on these things just because it's in favor of the player, not the AI. So you really have to force every single team when you set your defend teams to be as AI-proof as possible because the AI will do as many dumb moves as possible to really try to make you lose, it feels like. So you have to basically make it anti-AI proof and just kind of force it in any way possible with certain combinations of troops that only hit certain things to force the AI and trick it into doing the right option. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Best of luck with all your Guild War Defends, and have a wonderful week. Goodbye, everyone.